persecution politics movement in the late 1970s. One of the men who precipitated these events was a Baptist minister named Jerry Falwell. In 1956, at the age of 23, Falwell founded a church in Lynchburg, Virginia. In his sermons, Falwell railed against Brown versus Board of Ed, proclaiming, "If Justice Warren and his associates had known God's word and had desired to do the Lord's will, I'm quite confident that the 1954 decision would never have been made. The facilities should be separate. When God has drawn a line of distinction, we should not attempt to cross that line." After the Supreme Court decision, white politicians and parents sought alternative means to uphold God's line of distinction. They founded in the Seg Academies, all short for segregation academies, all white private schools that blossomed like daisies across the South after public schools desegregated. Holmes County, Mississippi was typical of desegregated southern school districts. In the first year after public school desegregation, white enrollment in the county's public schools dropped from 771 to 28. In the second year, it dropped to 0. Prince Edward County, Virginia, simply shut down its public schools, leaving black schools with students without any school in the county that would take them. Southern state governments did what they could for the cause, offering tuition grants, what Republicans now call vouchers, so that poor white students could continue to be educated in an environment free of dark pigmentation. When a federal court found such grants unconstitutional in 1969, the Seg Academies sought out tax-deductible donations to subsidize low-income whites. For example, one Holmes County Academy sent out a fundraising letter that warned, "Unless we receive substantial contributions to our scholarship fund, there will be many, many students whose minds and bodies are just as pure as those of any of their classmates and playmates, who, for financial reasons alone, will be forced into one of the intolerable and repugnant other schools." Other schools is in quotes there. In 1969, black parents in Holmes County filed a lawsuit demanding that the IRS deny tax exemptions to the 3 Seg Academies in the county. The courts ruled that the federal tax funds to finance private schools for the purposes of segregation violated the equal protection laws of the 14th Amendment, and the IRS began withholding tax exemptions from openly segregated schools. Nonetheless, Seg Academies easily skirted the new rules by adopting officially non-discriminatory language, admissions policies, while still practicing de facto segregation, and private all-white schools continued to proliferate across the South. The first Seg Academies were exact replicas of the secular schools they had replaced, but over time, most of the academies adopted Christian affiliations, such as Jerry Falwell's Lynchburg Christian Academy, which Lynchburg News described as a private school for white students. A 1973 Wall Street Journal article documented the emergence of this new variety of Seg Academy. "These days, Christian schools and segregation academies are almost synonymous," said a coordinator of the Education Task Force of the Southern Regional Council. Thus, when the IRS proposed strengthening the tax exemption rules in 1978 to force Seg Academies to actively recruit minority students and teachers, many Southern Christians reacted with fury and alarm at the dual threat to white privilege and Christian education. As a result, the IRS proposal played right into the hands of a young conservative strategist with big plans. In 1962, 19-year-old Paul Weyrich, a radio journalist and devout Catholic from Racine, Wisconsin, called on the chairman of the Wisconsin Republican Party to denounce a Supreme Court ruling that banned prayer in public schools. But the chairman refused to get involved, insisting, "Our business people would think it was strange that we are getting involved in a religious issue." That was the moment, Weyrich explained in an interview, that I said to myself, "By golly, this is just off track. I'm going to see to it that one day the party will listen to these kinds of issues." And that really became my mission in life. Soon after, Weyrich went to work for Republican politicians in Washington, where he continued to struggle to persuade the party to embrace socially conservative causes like outlawing abortion, ending busing, and supporting school prayer. In 1973, Weyrich founded the Heritage Foundation, the think tank that would revolutionize conservative political scholarship by discarding the scholarship. The following year, Weyrich left Heritage Foundation to become the board of because the board of directors wouldn't put enough emphasis on social issues. That's like leaving the Roman Catholic Church because the Pope won't put enough emphasis on religious issues, which incidentally Weyrich also did. After leaving Heritage, Weyrich focused on the political potential of the growing fundamentalist and evangelical churches, but he was stymied in his effort to mobilize them. The fundamentalist and evangelical communities were accustomed to keeping their distance from politics, adopting the position expressed by Jerry Falwell in 1965, "Preachers are not called upon to be politicians, but soul winners." Weyrich elaborated, "Christian conservatives of the evangelical and fundamentalist type had been told for years, ever since the Scopes trial, that they should not be involved in politics, that it was a sin to be involved in politics, that you would lose your soul if you were involved in politics." Years later, Falwell and others promulgated a myth that the shock of Roe v. Wade finally broke the slumbering religious right, enraging Christians across the country and prompting Falwell to launch his influential political organization, the Moral Majority. The chief problem with this story is that it's false. Many fundamentalist organizations, including the Southern Baptist Convention, to which Falwell belonged, were originally pro-choice and viewed abortion as a Catholic issue. W.A. Criswell, former president of the Southern Baptist Convention, declared after Roe v. Wade, "I have always felt that it was only after a child was born and had a life separate from its mother that it became an individual person. And it has always, therefore, seemed to me that what is best for the mother and for the future should be allowed." And W. Barry Garrett of the Baptist Press wrote, "Religious liberty, human equality, and justice are advanced by the Supreme Court abortion decision." Moreover, Falwell did not found the Moral Majority because of his outrage against the Supreme Court. The Moral Majority was Paul Weyrich's brainchild. Weyrich was certainly concerned about abortion, but his primary objective in founding the organization was to unite fundamentalist evangelicals, Catholics, and even Jews in a variety of social and political causes. Weyrich believed that the new organization needed a popular Protestant figurehead. He first tried to recruit Pat Robertson, who turned him down. Falwell, his second choice, accepted, but it took some persuading. In addition, Ed Dobson, a former Falwell associate, explicitly dismissed the significance of abortion in the early planning of the Moral Majority, recalling, "The religious right did not start because of a concern about abortion. I sat in the non-smoke-filled back room with the Moral Majority, and I frankly do not remember abortion even being mentioned as a reason why we ought to do something." According to Weyrich, even fundamentalists and evangelicals who opposed legalized abortion did not originally see the need for a political response to Roe v. Wade and other Supreme Court decisions. Their attitude was, if there are abortions and if there's no prayer in public school and there are all these problems, we're living in our own little communities and there's not going to be any abortions among our kids, and we have open Christian schools and prayer, and prayer will be recited there, and we simply don't need to be involved. The issue that did finally propel the religious right into action was not abortion, but the 1978 IRS proposal to crack down on segregated schools. Weyrich explained, "What galvanized the Christian community was not abortion, school prayer, or the ERA. I am living witness to this because I was trying to get those people interested in those issues, and I utterly failed. What changed their mind was Jimmy Carter's intervention against the Christian schools, trying to deny them tax-exempt status on the basis of so-called de facto segregation." Richard Viguerie, who along with Weyrich has been credited with founding what was once called the New Right, claimed that the IRS desegregation proposal kicked the sleeping dog. It galvanized the religious right. It was the spark that ignited the religious right's involvement in real politics. Thus, in a crucible of racism, piety, baked red hot by the fear of corrupted youth, a movement was born. The role of the IRS desegregation proposal in the birth of religious right has been well documented. Less discussed has been the fiction, the fuel, that fired the imaginations of those who answered the call. For while the IRS proposal clearly threatened segregated education, its impact on religious education was incidental. Any school, religious or secular, that failed to meet the modest requirements could easily adjust by recruiting minorities. For people to see the IRS proposal as an attack on Christian education, they had to see desegregation as the desegregation objective as a pretext, an excuse for going after the Christians. Weyrich's wording, Carter's intervention against the Christian schools on the basis of so-called de facto segregation, suggests exactly this point of view. These days, we have come to expect the right wing to represent any democratic initiative as a pretext for Christian persecution. But it was not always so. Before the 1980s, religious and right were not fused together. Fundamentalists and evangelicals hailed the election of Jimmy Carter, a former Sunday school teacher, a friend of Reverend Billy Graham, and the first evangelical president of the United States. He was not a president one would suspect of seeking to corrupt Christian youth. But with the IRS proposal, Carter seemed to mutate almost instantaneously in the minds of many evangelicals, from good Christian leader to anti-Christian autocrat. What made the transformation seem plausible to them was the appearance of a new villain on the American political landscape in the 1970s, an ideological network that had cunningly invaded Carter's government in its fiendish bid to indoctrinate Christian youth with atheistic, immoral, and unpatriotic ideas. It was called secular humanism. Humanism is a vague term, in use since the Renaissance, denoting the study of human history and culture, hence the term humanities. In the 20th century, religious reformers used the term to describe an emphasis on human as opposed to divine affairs. In this vein, a number of American intellectuals signed a document called the Humanist Manifesto in 1933 that laid out the tenets of religious humanism. The loose movement would later produce a rather insignificant organization of several thousand members, about the size of a single modern megachurch, called the American Humanist Association. Secularism is also a vague term, coined in 1851 by English atheist and convicted blasphemer George Jacob Holyoake, to denote a rejection of theological answers to questions of science and ethics. Secular humanism is a concept so nebulous that its definition defied even William Safire, who stumbled through a column that compared the exercise to trying to nail Jell-O to a tree. The term's gelatinous nature stems from its origins, or rather, its lack of origins in any genuine political movement. For secular humanism is a make-believe doctrine, invented by Christian theologians to blame an imagined enemy for the diminishing influence of religion in modern society. It was later repurposed by the American right as a code word for the precepts and practices of almost anyone this side of communism who disagrees with them, including liberals, feminists, atheists, civil libertarians, and internationalists. The first historical record of secular humanism appeared in 1933, courtesy of Anglo-Catholic Reverend William George Peck, who in a series of lectures predicted the imminent collapse of the false gospel of secular humanism. 10 years later, the non-existent Jell-O doctrine had not only avoided collapse, it now threatened Christianity, quote, more powerfully than in any period since the end of the Dark Ages, quote, end quote, according to the Archbishop of Canterbury, William Temple. And in 1949, a San Francisco conference of Episcopal bishops warned their colleagues, "We have been contaminated by the secular humanism of our time, as if it were toxic slime from the Andromeda Galaxy." In 1965, at the end of the revolutionary Second Vatican Council, Pope Paul VI sounded like a beaten pontiff, bowing to the new alien overlords, saying, "Secular humanism, revealing itself in its horrible anti-clerical reality, has in a certain sense defied this council. But we call upon those who term themselves modern humanists and who have renounced the transcendent value of the highest realities to give the council credit at least for one quality and to recognize our own new type of humanism. We too, in fact, we more than any others, honor mankind." But while secular humanism may have threatened England and subjugated Rome, it was no match for Max Rafferty, Superintendent of Public Instruction of California and defender of youth from the onslaught of secular humanist brainwashers. Early in his career, Rafferty became a conservative darling by blaming problems in the public school system on a dull reading curriculum that included stories about the stupid adventures of Muck Muck the Eskimo Boy, or Little Pedro from Argentina. Then in 1969, Rafferty's emergency response team produced the groundbreaking Guidelines for Moral Instruction in California Public Schools, which located the true villain behind Muck Muck and Little Pedro: secular humanism. In addition to accusing secular humanists of promoting boring literature, the guidelines also blamed them for teaching such evils as sex education, Marxism, and evolution. Outraged American conservatives soon answered the secular humanist infiltration of the American education system in the courts. In 1972, the religion editor of the Washington Evening Star sued the National Science Foundation in the interest of 40 million evangelical Christians for funding a biology textbook that failed to mention the important science of creationism. The suit accused the government of establishing as the official religion of the United States secular humanism. He lost. I'm going to skip a bit here. There are a few more cases that conservatives mounted against the religion of secular humanism, all of which lost. So which brings us up to 1978. So when the IRS moved against SEG academies in the August of 1978, the Christian soldiers were already manning the trenches and deploying advanced teams.